So I'm going to talk about rendering pixel art in 2.5D games. So generally, when you have a pixel game, rendering it isn't necessarily that complicated. Usually what you would do is what they call Painter's algorithm. So you can see this top grid represents an array of free, let's just say sprites. It doesn't matter that much. And these numbers are their depth, right? You usually want to sort by lowest depth first. So you'll sort them in order, 1, 2, and 3, somehow, it doesn't matter how yet. And then you'll just link them all directly to the screen in their order. So we draw the entirety of the red rectangle immediately, then the blue, and then the green. And this is generally how size holders work. It's usually not useful to do something more complicated than that. But it gets harder when you're talking about a 2.5D game, right? Like Pokemon or Chrono Trigger. What you can do is you can make the observation that as y increases, which is by convention downwards, you know that you're getting kind of closer to the camera perspective. So if you say that the depth is negative of y, then depth is decreasing as y is increasing, right? So this blue rectangle would be lower on the screen than the red rectangle, and that's why it draws in front. It then gets sorted that way. But this has some issues. For one, we can have like sprites where the y isn't really obvious. Like in this large case, you know, where's the y? Is it here or is it here? In this case, we've drawn the red rectangle above because we've said the blue's y is here, and now it's not being obstructed by this, right? These are solvable problems. You can just break it apart into multiple things. But it gets really hard when you're talking about a second dimension to the depth sorting, right? So in this case, we have a z dimension as well, meaning you can kind of go upwards as well as forwards. In this case, like just by looking at the position of these rectangles on screen, it's not at all obvious what should be drawing above here.
To understand it.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm looking sideways to understand this.
What?
Sorry, is my graph not clear? I can explain it better.
Why do you have to look sideways?
The graph is
Because I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I have to look sideways or like vertically.
No. So blue is vertical, y is like downwards, and then red is the x-axis.
Wait, is y downwards or like it's like deep, right?
So you have like a texture, y is 0, 0, and then y increases downwards. But then we have an imaginary z-axis that is skywards, and that's blue. If that makes sense.
So the green one is like representing sort of depth, and the blue one is representing up and down.
They kind of both represent depth. The reason that it's complicated is because for any pair of y and z coordinates, there are two ones that would give you the same depth value no matter how you kind of go about it, unless you do some weird stuff.
Right. But so does like the way that I would think it would be is like one of them just is how high it is on the screen, and the other one is like how far back it is in the.
Oh, that's my dad.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
1 second, guys. I'm gonna take a break and leave the VC. I'm gonna go talk to my dad. See you guys.
Thanks for coming, man.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming, bro.
See ya.
Take it easy.
I didn't know his dad was a dog too.
So Valaco, yeah, okay, what you said was right. So y would be the depth here, and then z would be vertical. It's also really hard when you have sloped walls. So, you know, it's not really clear what the y of a sloped wall is, and for any intersection you have, solving the problem for one intersection is going to introduce a problem in a different intersection. I don't remember how I solved this particular problem. I think I did something really complicated where the depth sorting of sloped walls just works differently than everything else. So another problem that can come up is when you're walking backwards, you can have a brief frame where you're kind of rendering above the wall that is in front of you as you're falling behind it, just because of how the depth math can work out when you're sorting by y and z. And these are all really hard problems. They're so hard to solve that usually game developers just don't. They'll either design the world in such a way that these problems rarely, if ever, come up, or they'll like actually just make it a three-dimensional game where they're rendering like an orthographic matrix and doing floating point arithmetic in order to get like actual rectangles that are angled towards the camera, moving in 3 dimensions using traditional graphics rendering techniques. Then that introduces a lot of complexity in other areas that have more problems, and it's not a really satisfying solution to me. So last November, what I did to solve this problem was I thought about, if we could sort every pixel individually, then this would be like really easy. But the problem is that normally it's just like way too hard to sort every single pixel. You would have to have huge buffers of like depth information for every individual pixel instead of every individual sprite, and it would take a very long time for the computer to do that. It would be harder to parallelize. But I thought, well, I now know Vulkan, right? So you can use the video card on your computer to accelerate a lot of tasks that are possible to run in parallel, meaning like multiple computations are happening simultaneously. And overall, it's faster in real time, even though it's doing more stuff. So what I did is I set up my game so that, well, not really game, but my renderer so that you have 2 sprites on the screen, right? And they push the pixel to like a list of 8 pixels that are in a grid for the final like texture that would go on your screen. So these pixels only hold a red, these ones only hold a blue, and these ones hold a red and a blue. Now this goes onto the GPU, and a compute shader there is going to sort every pixel or every bin of pixels individually in parallel. And the way that works is with what you call an odd-even sort. So the idea of an odd-even sort is you go through, here we have 8 elements, you go through 4 pairs at a time, starting with odd pairs, meaning 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and then you skip 7 and 0, and then you move the lower value leftward if it is, right? So 10 and 5 get swapped here, 0 and 5 do not get swapped because they're in the right place, 11 and 20 same. Now, next iteration you do even pairs, so starting 0, 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 5, 6 and 7, and then swap those, so now 5 is here and 20 is there, and those are swapped and those are swapped, and you do it at most 8 times. One of the interesting things about an odd-even parallel sort is that it's guaranteed to have linear algorithmic complexity. If you have 8 elements, you sort 8 times, and it's guaranteed to be sorted no matter what. It's also very easy to run in parallel because you can just have one thread do one sort per pair, and so long as you synchronize the starting of a sort, it's completely fundamentally thread safe. Resource contention can be a problem, but that just works differently on GPUs. So in the end, we have an array. Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, sorry, I have a question. You say threads. I don't know that much about, like, I know sort of what GPUs can do, but I'm not able to. Do they actually work with something like threads? I would assume it's some like kind of...
No, they don't actually use threads.
Thread, per se, yeah.
But the word thread safe is like just so common, even when you're not actually talking about threads, if you're talking about actors or something. I do hear it often described as threads.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that was the terminology people use, but yeah, sure, makes sense.
Anyway, so the 0th pixel is the one with the lowest depth, so that's the only one we care about. That's what actually gets drawn to the screen. And then, let's say we have 480 by 320 pixels in the texture. That computation is happening for every pixel basically at the same time. And this basically worked, but it had a couple issues. One, when I initially thought about the idea, I significantly underestimated how much data a pixel would be, because I knew it's not just going to hold color data. If I wanted things like 3D lighting and stuff, then you would have to hold its Y and Z position. Well, that would be necessary just for the depth sorting. You'd also have to hold its like a normal vector. So you need to know basically the orientation of the pixel in an imaginary 3D space. And if you want to have more sophisticated effects like iridescence or luminosity or specularity or any like physical properties to make more complicated materials like metal or something, or like oil slicks, beetles, whatever, you would need way more data. Because of how SIMD vector alignment works on GPUs using a standard called STUD 430, I didn't realize that the data was actually going to be padded out a lot. It didn't even occur to me that it would be padded out at all, but even after optimizing to minimize how much padding there is, it was still like twice as much as I expected to have. basically all of this data for every pixel in the image was like 40 kilobytes or something, which is a real problem because on a lot of hardware that's going to be memory bandwidth bottlenecked. So the memory actually won't be able to move onto the GPU to be sorted fast enough for it to actually be usable in real time on some hardware. On my computer, it actually worked fine. I mean, I didn't profile it, so I don't know exactly how fast it was, but it was at least real-time interactive, even with things like 3D lighting and stuff. So I didn't work on that anymore in December. I was doing something else. But then, started this month, I had a new idea. What if you could solve this with ray tracing? So here's like the worst explanation of ray tracing ever, in brief. So imagine this is your texture that is drawn to the screen, right? For every pixel, you're going to cast a ray forwards along the direction of the camera, basically. And it's going to be intersecting some surface. And then from that surface, you bounce the ray towards every light source that you care about. So you're imagining tracing light rays backwards, because presumably photons would hit here and then bounce into the camera. But you're doing it the other way around. And the reason that's interesting is because, one, it tells you inherently what is the closest pixel. You just travel through some data structure to find it. And also, you can obstruct rays with something like a cube, right? So we're tracing this right here, and en route to the light source, we hit something else. Now we know that light source is not influencing this pixel because it's blocked. That's basically just the easiest way to program shadows, or at least shadows that are like basically physically accurate. With conventional rendering techniques, this is actually really hard to do in 2D games. It's so hard that, like, I don't know that I've ever seen one actually do it well. All the ones that have interesting shadows are actually just 3D games that I'm aware of. And here we have this blue arrow is the normal vector, so that would tell us kind of how directly this light is influencing this pixel, and then how bright it should be. I'm not going to get too detailed into what the data structure I designed was, but initially what I had was sort of this. So this is a two-dimensional slice of a 3D cube, right? So you've got the Y direction and the blue direction, and these colored areas are just cubes in the world, and the gray is the area that's actually in your view, that the camera's seeing. So you notice there's a lot of space outside of here. That occupies space in memory, but we don't use it. It's not really helpful in any way at all. There are also some more subtle issues, like we have to trace a ray along this path. Without getting too thick in the weeds, that's a really inefficient way of using memory. You usually want to be able to arrange your memory so that you're going through it in a linear order for a lot of reasons. It's easier to vectorize, it keeps it minimizes cache loads, it keeps the whole data structure warmer in cache for longer, it makes just resource contention less hard to solve, whatever. So I had an idea. Another problem is if we have a ray starting at this point here, and we move down, at this point here, we move here, we didn't find anything in that block. Then we move here, I think I did it wrong. Well, the point I'm trying to get at is it's not actually possible to notice that you intersect this hot face unless you actually check 2 bins per z coordinate, and that doubles the amount of work. So what I do now is I instead skew the y of everything linearly to its z. So these are still cubes, but they're skewed upwards, right? And so now we only have a rectangle that does represent all the information in the view, and you can just trace rays straight forwards, right? Because this is it's an equivalent representation to this more intuitive 3-dimensional space. And it solves the problem of not being able to intersect things, because now the cubes occupy 2 bins instead of the rays traveling through 2 bins.
Why is the view area like a diagonal slice in the first place?
Sorry, you're really quietly.
Is this here? Why is the visible area a diagonal slice in the first place?
Because you're looking downwards at a screen in a 2.5D game. So you want to kind of see the top of faces.
I just remembered what 2.5D was. Okay. I was thinking of something different.
Yeah, most of these problems are not as hard if you're looking directly down or straight forwards.
Yeah, I was thinking sort of straightforward. So that makes the first diagram make more sense too. Okay, cool.
Right, so in a real game, you might want to have relatively complicated art instead of cubes. This is like a house that I drew like a few years ago. You can see like the front face of this wall has a kind of complicated cuboid form, right? How would you cast shadows against that normally? With this technique, you know for every pixel what its like three-dimensional coordinate is, because every sprite here would have both its color as well as a depth map and a normal map. And with the depth map, that tells you basically the relative z offset of every pixel here to the actual position of this wall in the game. You can figure out the x, y, and z per pixel. And then you have a normal map that tells you its orientation in 3D space. And this is enough to tell you exactly how light should intersect every pixel of this wall exactly correctly. So theoretically, you could cast shadows that conform perfectly to the shape of this. Why is this not? Right, so what I got working this month was this little demo here. I think it started like January 4th, so was that like 3.5 weeks, something like that. It probably was kind of slow, but you can see the shadows are not very precise right now because they're not actually intersecting the cube, they're intersecting the general vicinity of the cube for reasons. But you can see this light source is in fact casting a shadow that is bouncing off of different levels of terrain more or less correctly.
Okay.
So this has a lot of problems right now. It's unacceptably slow for one. I didn't do anything super performance oriented, but it's not doing anything obviously stupid either. Like, it's a reasonable data structure basically. It's not allocating memory in a loop. It's not allocating the data sparsely or anything. So I'm surprised that it is as slow as it is. But I have a bunch of ideas for making it faster, so whatever. Another problem that might want to be solved is for having complex figures. So like this little cat character that I drew a while ago. Yeah, okay, I have it here. Right, so this is actually animated. Anyways, how would you cast a shadow on this thing? Because the problem is a lot harder now. Because what if you have a light ray that's coming from behind it, right? There's no information about what the backside of any of these sprites looks like because they're not 3D models, they're just raster graphics. The idea that I have for this is using sign distance fields to represent a 3D volume for complex shapes. I don't really want to explain sign distance fields in too much detail. It's a concept that sort of comes out of physics. But basically you can represent how close a ray intersects to some point in space. And this is actually very inexpensive to compute. Well, actually, you figure out how close it is to multiple fields, but it's relatively fast to compute. It also gives you kind of umbra for free. Umbra is like how shadows are kind of blurry on their edges. That effect is umbra. And you might want to have it. And because you know how deeply into the volume you're intersecting, you can very easily get that effect. I think it'd also be relatively easy to make and animate sign distance field volumes rather than like traditional manifold meshes or like sprite stacking or something. Something that a lot of games will do, well maybe not a lot, but some, is they actually just are a 3D game with no sprites at all. They're just manifold meshes and simply rendering at a low resolution with like some shaders to make it look kind of like pixel art. And those have good shadows sometimes, but I think they generally don't look that good because you don't have very much control over what the graphics actually look like. Like they never have kind of crisp sort of shapes in the tiles, right? And they usually don't even have outlines because outlines are kind of hard in that way. But yeah, so these are ideas that I've got for a renderer. I'll probably keep working on it into the future. I think what I've got right now is a little bit interesting, and the sorting just didn't work.
What about using a 3D model for the shadows, but then drawing the art like over the model magically?
Well, so I've talked about like using sign distance fields for representing that shape. Do you mean like a manifold polygon mesh?
Well, I was saying yes, or just whatever. Yeah, or whatever. What you were saying is like you could use a 3D model for the figure, but trying to apply cartoon shaders and make it look as good as it's drawn, the figure is a little weird. Ends up a little weird. So my question is like, could you do the 3D figure, but then just kind of draw the frames you need over the shape of the figure manually, and then you don't have to rely on like a shader?
I think I see what you're saying. That's not an effect that I've seen anyone try that might be kind of interesting, but I think it would possibly be well.
Yeah, like,
I did something like that once with wings, because the wings were just too hard to draw, so I modeled them in Blender and then rendered it, and it looked bad, so I just drew over it. But they were still spliced in the end. Maybe something like that could work. I don't know that it would be more efficient to do that necessarily. It might be, it might not. That's an idea.
yeah, like maybe I don't know like shit about game dev. I haven't understood a lot of the stuff you've been saying because
I'm sorry.
But it's no problem. But like, no, you're explaining it great. I'm just not very good at taking information. You know, maybe like I agree with what Jack said. That sounded smart. So that's my input.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Mountain Mix, do you have something to say?
Are you there?
Mountain Mix?
Yes.
Oh, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming in
I
quiet.
think muted. Still hear us.
Did you say it?
Somebody say I was muted.
No, you're not muted. You're good.
Okay, cool. Why am I talking?
What do you think? Any thoughts, questions, concerns?
I honestly don't really understand most of this, but it sounds cool.
For the record, I did understand pretty much everything. I liked it.
Ah, thank you.
I was trying to understand. I think like I came back like getting water, and you were already past the initiation stage, and I was trying to follow on what was going on.
Well, that was an amazing panel, Conscad.
Thank you.
What's the benefit? What's the benefit of separating the legs?
The legs?
Got in the animation.
Oh, okay.
And the sprite on the screen.
Yeah.
The legs are like red and blue.
Oh, that's just because I never colored and shaded those on that character.
Oh, I thought there was going to be some like clever parallaxes.
No, do I have? I think I've got Daphne around somewhere. Ah, crap.
Why do your dots? Why are they so close together?
You drew these?
Yeah, okay, this character has more colors. That was for my midterm. The cat was for a different project that I stopped working on. I was working on with someone who I thought was maybe going to be here, but unfortunately she didn't come. Anyways, this goat character is someone else that I drew that has legs. That is the same thing as the cat.
What programs did you use to draw them?
A sprite.
Yeah, he's great.
My only review feedback is something I probably should have known, but I forgot what 2.5D was, so I think you should show a single picture of what 2.5D looks like, and then I would have gotten it. as far as like improving the presentation, but other than that, yeah, I think it should be good.
Yeah, something like this, I guess.
So, not a programming or dev question, I guess, like your sprite, whatever button you said you used to draw draw sprites, what do you use as like a reference, or did you do like? Well, how did you learn to first of all like do these animation cycles and also like draw from that reference of that angle to top down?
Yeah, so for this character, there's a Baphomet tag on E621. I went through those, and that gave me a lot of intuition for how the horns should work and stuff. For the cat, this kind of evolved from a different character that my friend designed. Originally, it was I don't know. I was kind of iterating on this cat character in different forms for quite a while, and just I guess pushing the pixels around. Eventually, it comes together in a way that looks basically okay if you just put enough time on it. As for the angles, that is something that I think most people get wrong at first, and I definitely did as well, because their intuition for how angles should work is not exactly accurate. Well, maybe yours is, but most people's is not. What really helps me, I think, is like diagramming it out. So if I know that the character's angle should be like 45 degrees, that way I can draw the scaffolding like that, and then, you know, put forms
So that's like,
around it.
that's like a reference line for the character facing 45 degree.
Yeah, it's especially helpful for the eyes, I think, to have these, and for the arms. Like, people usually do something that's more like this angle, or like, oops. I hate KDE software so much.
Yeah, I was surprised when you actually looked up something like this. I didn't think anyone used any of these types of...
Well, I like MS Paint a lot, and I wanted something that's kind of like MS Paint. This is the closest I can find. But yeah, so people usually get the angles wrong, and I think it's because they don't draw the scaffolding, because it's not usually obvious to do at first, but it helps a lot. And just in general, like also with environment art, like I drew Applejack's house once. That like most of the process for that was just building the kind of template shapes of it, just by putting lines together and trying to get the geometry right.
No, you can just call it a barn. It's okay, you know. You can just call it that.
Right, her barn.
Is that the panel?
Yeah.
Question if that's okay.
What's that?
Yeah,
I read some. I was reading this devlog for Factorial, and they have, I guess, a similar kind of 2.5D style, and they chose to make their game grid. I think it was 1 by root 2, so everything is a bit squished. So
Yeah.
how do you approach that with the ratio of your
Personally,
from the top down?
Personally, I don't think that's a good idea because, well, I don't know how Factorial really works, but having a 1x2 grid makes the math in general way more complicated, or at least it does for ray tracing. I guess just for tiles, it's about the same. But generally, I think you can just draw the art so that it's squished instead of just making the actual internal representation of the game squished. I definitely think it's like good to not necessarily have a direct perspective like I guess a lot of games do. I do appreciate the kind of slanted thing, but I think that might be better off suited as like an art facet rather than a technical facet.
Yeah, cool.
So, I think I might already ask, but like, what I was wondering is the animation, like right there, like, did you just look at like how other games animate their sprites, individual frames, or did you look at some tutorial?
Well, so I used to be in a community called Mario Fan Games Galaxy where I was drawing a bunch of art and getting feedback on that, and the general consensus there was just like, if you start with kind of blobby abstract shapes and then refine it downwards, you can get it to a better form easier than if you try to like imitate something perfectly from the start. And I definitely think that's true in my experience. So I usually just like the first version of Daphne was way just chunkier. Well, maybe not Daphne, because Daphne doesn't really have shading. Minerva the cat definitely was a lot chunkier in earlier versions, and I just kind of carved it down over time. And some other characters, like an oleander drawing I did, was the same. That's my workflow currently. But as far as the shapes go, actually, I think I did find a reference for this front drawing that really inspired me. It was like some pencil sketch that was animated. And then I think I based the other angles kind of off of how the legs moved in that dimension. Oh, ASPICE lets you draw circles that can like conform to like a 2/1 grid, and that makes it very easier to see like how a complicated thing like a leg should rotate in different frames. Because you can have the circle and then you have a line intersecting it, and then that tells you where like the knee should go, roughly. And of course, there's a lot of leeway. It's, it's not very detail oriented, but yeah.
Nice.
Heck yeah.
Alright.
Is that it?
Great job, Cons Cat. That was
Thank
an
you.
amazing panel.